That currency is at 1940 against the US dollar. We're talking, of course, about South Africa's currency, which has been called many names, among them the rattlesnake, all striving to capture the currency's volatility, tradability, and its uniqueness as a bridge between the West and its capital and emerging markets from Brazil to Turkey. So today we decided to bring together people who trade in the currency for a living to understand what moves the currency, just how big this market is. Let me introduce them. We've got Mamokete Lijane. She is trading strategist at Standard Bank. Matete Thulare is RMB Head of Execution, and Cilliers, currency strategist at TreasuryONE. Mamokete, I'm going to begin with you. And shall we reference that currency? We have seen that currency trading at record lows. And I think I've always been struck by the fact that when you talk to people about the rand, there appears to be very little understanding of what moves this currency. I want to begin there, first of all, before we talk about what it takes to move the rand.
Hi, I think I've lost you.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me. But I think I lost the tail end of the question.
Okay, the tail end of the question was just trying to understand the big factors that move the rand. And I'm actually thinking maybe let's just make them a couple so that we give everyone a chance to come in and weigh in terms of importance, what moves the currency.
I think as a fundamental principle, before we add all sorts of other things that we add on, we have to understand that the rand is a balance of payments phenomena. It's the price at which we will be able to get the dollars that we need to finance our economic activity. So that is the fundamental principle. So the more you can export, the tighter your trade balance is, or if you're in trade surplus, which was the case in 2021 and the early part of 2022, the stronger the rand is going to be. If you run into a trade deficit where you're exporting less, importing more, and you're not getting enough foreign currency coming in as investment, the rand has to adjust to attract the dollars that you need to run the economy. If you can firstly understand that basic principle, you will not be confused by anything that happens with the rand.
Absolutely. Andre, I'll come to you. It's the same question.
The same question, and we've heard what Mamokete said, and that's quite true. But I think what you want here is more some mentioning which factors. Now, an international economy intertwined with what happens internationally, so we will always be influenced by international factors and what happens in the world, like a Russian-Ukraine war, like what happens with interest rates in the United States and Europe, what happens in the economies around the globe. Secondly, what happens in South Africa becomes very important, and at the moment that's taken a little bit of the forefront, and that would be cost of doing business deteriorating because of load shedding. Transnet, the transport of goods to and from harbors because of load shedding and the doldrums that they're in, and sabotage of railway lines, being grey listed, making some wrong political choices. So those are some of the factors that you can single out at this point in time that influences the movement of the currency.
Thanks, Andre. Thanks for that. Matete, I don't know if I've made it harder for you to come in last, but essentially it's the same question. Matete, can you hear me? It looks like we may have lost him. Let's try one more time. Can you hear me, Matete?
Can you hear me, Godfrey?
Ah, yeah. There you go. There you go. We've got you on the phone. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I didn't hear what Mamokete and Andre have said, but I mean, I think, for us, what we've realized is, 5-10 years ago, I mean, the rand, 66% of the time was driven by global factors, and, the other third would be driven by local factors. I mean, in a typical year, you'd find that, the rand would move by around 2 Rand 50 in a range for the whole year. But I mean, what has for me shifted is also the level and the dynamics over the past couple of years. I mean, if you cast your mind back to all the political influx in terms of news and headlines that we've seen, it feels like at this point in time now there's a 50-50 movement in terms of, the rand movement over the past couple of years. I mean, if you think about the political sphere, I mean, that is now starting to emerge as a bigger clear theme in terms of the rand volatility and also, just the geopolitical tension. I mean, just 5-6 years ago, the Russia-Ukraine situation was there. It was behind the scenes. It wasn't really at the front of mind for the markets. And then you look at it now. I mean, it's top of mind. In 2016, you had the likes of Brexit. You had the likes of Donald Trump. You even had Ramaphosa. I mean, it just shows you how much of the local factors have also started dominating. You bring it, to the fore over the past couple of years, especially with the ANC dynamics in terms of the leadership positions. You also think about what has happened from a sentiment point of view, the structural reforms that we talk about in the country. It just shows you that at this point in time, it feels like, at least now there's a movement whereby 50% is dominated by local factors, the other 50 also dominated by global factors.
Yeah, thanks, Matete, for that. Mamokete, I know you need to run. Can I get one more little bite from you in terms of that making of the final price that we see in terms of the rand? Not that there's a final price, but yeah, that sort of average price that we see in terms of the rand. That swing to local factors, is this just an environment issue, or are we likely then to swing to what we've traditionally done in the past, where international factors weigh more than local?
So I think that'll swing back and forth. So as I initially said, it's about your exports. So whatever it is that happens, whether it be local or offshore, that affects your exports, that affects your imports. So if you have load shedding, it affects both your exports. It lowers your exports. It increases your imports. Anything that you do that affects your attractiveness of capital is going to affect the value of the currency. So what we've seen of late, we moved, I always say, we've moved from a pay-as-you-go kind of environment where South Africa was a highly predictable economic cycle where a lot of what was happening would be driven by what was happening globally, what was the demand, supply, etc. To one where our own policy making has become a lot more of a factor in terms of how the economy operates. And because of that, we've seen with credit rates and downgrades, which actually reflect the same thing, where, you've got a weakening of the underlying structure of the economy, where policy making becomes extremely important, where who is the president starts to matter versus you just kind of know how things work. So in this environment, as an investor said to me, South Africa's starting to look like a frontier market, and therefore you will treat it as such. That means then you really are going to be driven by one news after another piece of news, as opposed to it being something that is predictable. So that lack of predictability definitely affects what happens to currency markets and the volatility that we see relative to what we saw previously.
Yeah, someone needs to get that word to the president. Mamokete will let you go. Thanks very much indeed for joining us this afternoon. She's trading strategy to Standard Bank. Andre, I want to come to you and get a little bit more technical. Many people wonder if we have a session in which we trade the rand, i.e., does the rand sleep?
There's no fashion in which it trades. I mean, and we have to go back to what Mamokete also said. There's a demand for dollars and there's a supply of dollars. And ultimately, the demand and supply determines where the currency goes. And on certain days and certain periods of the month, you have higher demand, lower demand, depends on what the flows are going through the markets. So, but there's no specific day that we can single out or a specific fashion. I mean, you ask for a price and if you need the dollars, you buy the dollars, and you ask for a price and if you need to sell it, you sell it.
Yeah.
So that's as far as the technical side is concerned. The decisions on when to buy and when to trade, I suppose, we can go back to the advice that clients get from all our so-called experts. Yeah. Trying to determine when's the best and when's the worst. Yeah. But we only also use the information that we have to advise. Ultimately, what really prevails is the advice should be around solid risk management principles. Yeah. in getting some of the volatility out of the income statement of the client. I think today and going forward, it's more in analyzing the markets and see how the shift between local factors and international factors are actually taking place. Yeah. And how are we going to get that to be solved by the people that must solve it?
Yeah, and very quickly, 2 points that I wanted to address is the issue of where the rand price is made. I think there's always confusion because you've got international players, you've got local players. I don't know if you can help me answer that one. And then the second part to that question is around just the size of the market. How much are we talking about in a trading day for the South African rand? And I know this one is a rough estimate.
Yeah, that's a very rough estimate. The marketplace is one marketplace for both South Africa and the international markets. There are certain trading platforms like Bloomberg's, like Reuters and so forth, where any contributor to those platforms can input a price, and it's either a price to buy or to sell dollars, and that's how the marketplace is formed. There's no New York or London or South Africa or whatever. It's an international marketplace determined by all participants within the market based on supply and demand. In terms of volumes, it's absolutely literally billions of dollars per day that gets traded in the markets. If I were to give you an idea, if you look at the trade in foreign bonds being withdrawn or sold by foreigners just in the last 10 days, then you're speaking in the order of somewhere between 15 and 20 billion rand. You can start dividing that and then get a daily figure, and that would just be on the bond market. That would exclude any trade related to imports and exports and any speculative trade. So the turnover's quite a couple of $1 billion per day going through this market in terms of speculation, trade for imports and exports, and financial transactions like equity and bond trades that goes through.
Yeah. So, Matete, I was trying to get a little bit of intelligence before bringing you in on this one, because I had a conversation with John Cairns, your colleague, the other time, and we talked about a very, very large figure in terms of the amount of money that goes through that market on a single day, which, of course, is difficult, as Andrew is explaining, but I'm going to ask you the question. What are we talking about in terms of volumes on a daily basis here with the South African rand?
Look, I mean, Godfrey, the dollar remains the kingpin of all currencies, right? I mean, which remains obviously the preeminent currency. I mean, it's part of 88% of all currency trades. Now, the rand cements its position as part of the top 20 most traded currencies in the world. In addition to trading in the domestic markets that we see here, obviously the currency also trades in the offshore markets. I mean, in the case of South Africa, the rand trades extensively. I mean, according to some analysis, 80% of global trading in the rand is conducted offshore. Now, when you look at the total turnover in FX markets, I mean, this is somewhere around $7.5 trillion every day. Now, just the headline number for daily rand turnover in terms of FX, it is around that $65 billion a day. And you rightfully say, I mean, I think, just in the spot market, it is about $14 billion a day. But also remember something, geography and history also play for something. I mean, if you look at the UK, the US, Hong Kong, Singapore, almost 80% of all FX gets traded globally there. I mean, the US as a trading center has fared less well, obviously losing ground to the likes of London, which has shrugged off the Brexit uncertainty, which accounts for about 43% of all FX activity. The likes of the UK and also Hong Kong, they've seen their trading, turnover also grow, by more than global average. It's also signifying the rise in FX trading in the likes of mainland China, where you now have the 10th largest FX trading center. 5 years ago, it was in 16th place. So it just shows you the shifting in dynamics, obviously, across the board, just from an international perspective and a geographic perspective, and also when you take into account the large volumes that get traded throughout the whole day.
I'm getting schooled here. So top 20 in terms of the currencies traded in the world. For an economy that's very small, I don't remember what the ranking of South Africa is on a global scale, but if I remember correctly, there was that IMF study that showed that the rand, in terms of the volumes that are traded per GDP, has got one of the highest volumes. Does that still remain the case? And what does that mean in terms of finding the correct value of the rand? We have to say we are correctly priced all the time, given the large number of players that are in this market.
Look, I mean, I think when you just look at it, I mean, when you just look at all the Cilliers settlement data, the trading venue turnovers, the Reserve Bank figures for the FX market locally, as I said, I mean, we are looking at around $14 billion per day that is just traded in the FX market. Don't forget that, I mean, obviously, this includes, when we, besides trading against the dollar, then you also look at the most liquid and actively traded currency pair in the world, which is the euro dollar. That also now filters through into euro rand and sterling rand. And when you just look at, I mean, when you just look at just the FX market in terms of the spot size limits, I mean, the client market size there is about that $10 billion to $14 billion a day. Obviously, some of these volumes also go through some of the hedge funds, some of the proprietary trading firms. It just shows you that even like Andre said, I mean, also when you have hedge funds that also come and dwell into the fixed income space, they also have a rand component that they also need to do conversions for. So it just shows you that also there is quite a lot that actually factors through into the rand market on a daily basis.
Yeah. Andre, you're the big picture guy. So let's talk about what you do on a daily basis and ask you the difficult one. December 31, 2023, where will it be?
December 2023, where will it be? It would be, in my opinion, based on what I see currently and how things develop in terms of how we're solving problems and how we're creating problems in the country, that we all expected the rand initially towards the beginning of this year to come back to a fairer value in terms of economic fundamentals. But with local factors like load shedding, politics, etc., our own inherent problems in the country, and Merchant referred to it, Mamokete referred to it, becoming more and more important. It's my opinion that we're not going to see that massive downward move, and that we'll most probably end the year around the 1875 level, which will still be very much on the lower end. You asked an interesting question, and the answer came as to everybody speaks about the currency being incorrectly priced. It's incorrectly priced in terms of economic fundamentals, right, and buying power parity. And that simply says that the rand should trade at stronger levels. If we ask you about the fairing, whether it's a fair price at the moment,
yes,
what you see in the market and where it trades is a fair price in terms of fundamentals, technical analysis, and very importantly, the sentiment of people. And at this point in time, the sentiment is very, very low. But you cannot have an unfair price, because if it was an unfair price, it would be taken on by the market, because the supply and demand of dollars in terms of pricing on your daily basis determines for you what is the fair price for the day.
And
so
you're going to
are trading at a fair value, taking
all the factors into account.
Into account.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you couldn't say there was a more transparent market, if you like, isn't it? Because as all of you guys were saying, this currency is traded here, this currency is traded in London, it's traded in New York, it's traded in Frankfurt, it's traded in Hong Kong. Matete, I want to come to you as well. The focus for the rest of the year, the house view at your big house?
Look, I think it's an ever-moving target at this point in time, especially when you consider the amount of moving dynamics, not only from a local perspective to also a global perspective. I mean, if you think about it, 2022, the big two eyes were inflation and interest rates. It feels like that theme has continued into 2023. It's also what is the Fed going to do? Obviously, now they're in a blackout period where none of the Fed speakers can also talk. And obviously, we wait their decision on the 14th of June. There's also the local MPC. There's also, like Andre has mentioned, I mean, the local factors that we keep talking about. It's nothing new. Eskom, Transnet, all the structural reforms that we keep talking about, the infrastructure infrastructure drives, the solar renewables projects. I mean, at least at this point in time, the one positive or some of the three key positives that we have been seeing is the fact that at least Transnet is looking to open up, private rail access to the private sector for them to actually alleviate some of the ongoing issues there. That will help the likes of Tungela, Exaro, some of the coal counters that actually need to export, including the mining sector. You also look at the fact that already from a private sector perspective, the energy renewable, the solar renewable projects, that's ongoing and that's going very strong. There's quite a lot of impetus there. And also, I suspect also with the recent interactions between private sector and also government in terms of obviously all these structural reforms, that's also going to at least make some silver linings and some headway. And I think it is a very tough call to ask. I mean, where do we land come the 31st of December? At this point in time, our projections are slightly similar to Andre. We also still forecasting around the 1875 to 1850 levels. But like we know the rand, it is a rattlesnake. It can bite. We might find ourselves at 17 if there is a plethora of good news. If China opens up, if the US, stalls hiking rates, if things also from a global perspective turn rosy, anything is possible at this point in time. But like I said, Godfrey, quite a lot of moving parts at this point in time.
Absolutely. And I was wondering, as a parting shot though, how many rand in that 19 rand 40 or 19 rand 50 price that we are seeing in the pricing at the moment are due to the fact that we're short of power. So when we turn the year, how much are we likely to see the currency picking up if power supplies, as you say, begin to stabilize with the private sector coming in more and reducing the shortages that we are seeing at the moment? Very quickly.
I don't know if Andre wants to go first, but I mean, I think if we see a stabilization of the power supply, that will filter through into the mining data, the manufacturing data. You'll start seeing at least a bit of uptick. You start seeing the resumption of the investment pledges that a lot of counterparts have been speaking about. You also see the sentiment also coming back into the fixed income market. Already you're seeing the local Reserve Bank also talking about the fact that they're worried about the demand at our weekly auctions. The mere fact that foreigners haven't been taking up as much like they did in the past, it shows you the negative sentiment and confidence in the country. But if those, those small steps that we keep talking about, the structural reforms get spoken about and they keep getting the boxes ticked and we start doing things correctly, I think, we could see even the rand pull back to even the 17 levels, but it will take a lot besides the local factors and also the global factors for us to actually have that, turnaround to seeing it below 18.
Fantastic. Andre, very quickly.
A sustainable change in our electricity supply and on the path of supplying constant electricity to our businesses and to our mining sector, I would shave off at least 75 cents off what my prediction would be, and I would take it down to 18.
Talk about the cost of load shedding. Thank you, sir. I enjoyed that, and we needed to have that conversation. We're joined initially at the beginning by Mamokete Lijane, trading strategist at Standard Bank. Matete Thulare, you heard him, RMB head of execution. And lastly, you were listening there to Andre Cilliers, currency strategist at TreasuryONE, talking about an important point. So we could look potentially at certainly more than a rand in terms of gains if we solve the electricity problem. So what would happen is if we were able, like say,